Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lode Holt. In the recreation room of a California retirement home, four ladies were playing canasta and chatting. An elderly gentleman walked into the room. They recognized him as a newcomer, and they all perked up. One of the ladies said, "Hello there. You're new here, aren't you?" He smiled and replied that he had moved in only that morning. Another lady said, "Where did you live before you moved in?" He replied, "I was just released from San Quentin, where I spent the last 20 years." A third lady said, "Oh, really? What were you in for?" He answered, "I murdered my wife." The fourth lady sat up, smiled brightly, and said, "Oh, then you're single?" I'm not sure that's the point I would take from that conversation. But in fact, we do that all the time. So often we focus on some unimportant detail and miss what we ought to see. Today we are wrapping up talking about stories involving both Jesus and fish. And I have to be honest, what I'm sharing with you today is basically a sermon I preached in 2013, and it started with that horrible but funny story. Our Bible story for today provides us a good example of focusing on unimportant details. The gospel writer John makes a pretty big deal out of a catch of fish. After the risen Jesus had appeared to the disciples, they went to Galilee. With no further instructions, eventually Peter decided to fill the time by going fishing, and although they fished all night, they had nothing. About dawn, a man on the shore told them to fish on the other side of the boat, which any fisherman would tell you was a ridiculous piece of advice. But they did it, and they caught a large catch of fish, too many to bring into the boat. That's when one of them said to Peter, "It is the Lord." Peter jumped in and swam to shore, and the others came, dragging the net along. Jesus had a campfire going and some fish already cooking, and suggested that they bring some more from their catch. So they brought it in and counted the fish. There were 153 of them. 153. It wasn't enough for John to say that it was a large catch of fish. No, John spelled it out precisely. There were 153 of them. And that's when the trouble started. You see, people began to take notice of that number. They began to try to attach a significance to it. Cyril of Alexander in the 5th century, for example, decided that 100 represented the fullness of the Gentiles, 50 symbolized the remnant of the Jews, and the final 3 were for the Trinity. St. Augustine got more complicated. He started with the fact that there were 10 commandments and that 7 was known as the perfect number of grace. 10 plus 7 equals 17. Now, if you add all the numbers from 1 to 17 together, in other words, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, all the way up to 17, you get 153. Not only that, but if you were to arrange 17 fish in a row, and then 16 in the next row, and then 15 in the next one, all the way down to a row of 1, you'd get a perfect triangle to symbolize the Trinity. Another scholar, Jerome, suggested that there were 153 different types of fish in the sea, and this was clearly a message that the church was supposed to reach out to all kinds of people with the message of the resurrection. Now, I'm not making this up. These were serious theologians looking for deep meaning in the fact that John wrote down exactly how many fish there were. And yet, don't you get the feeling that all their efforts were focused on something trivial while the greater truth was passed by? "It is the Lord," the disciples said to Peter. What a simple, stunning statement. It's a statement that no one would have expected. They had seen Jesus crucified, dead, buried. And yet this disciple knew and said to Peter, "It is the Lord." How did he know? Well, the same way we know. When he acts in our lives, we know it's Jesus. When the miraculous happens, when life is renewed, when hope is restored, when goodness wins, it is the Lord. When people care for others, when kindness and mercy is lived, when we walk humbly with God, it is the Lord. When love overwhelms, when joy bubbles over, when surpassing peace fills our hearts, it is the risen Lord. That's the point that's important here. The risen Jesus is here and among us. And just like those disciples, we encounter him in our lives, making a difference for us, making a difference in us. Be filled with awe and wonder. Jesus lives. Look into your lives and see him, and know that it is the Lord. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.